Sources of evidence. How morphological information is presented in the mind. Sources of evidence. There are two sources of evidence. One is experimental and other is naturalistic data. So, psychologists use experimental, and in the realm of morphology, lexical decision task, that how whilst taking a decision regarding a certain lexical item, lexical decision tasks are the most widely used way of probing into the mental representation of morphology. Lexical decision tasks are often used in combination with priming. Priming, exposure to one stimulus influence the response that is to the subsequent stimulus, right? The prior presentation of another word. For example, if we think of doctor, and we after that will be quickly able to recognize the word nurse quickly. So this is known as priming. This means that the subject who has to make a lexical decision first receives some other information which prompts the subsequent stimulus. An example of priming is the following. Exposure to one stimulus influences a response to a subsequent stimulus, a case of identity priming. This is known as identity priming. That how do we recognize the next word, how the next word how in the case of next word our activation level is quicker or fast. A higher level of activation by previous access to the same word, we instantly think of that next word. Other ways of primings are phonological priming. Maybe a similar a word that we have used may have phonological effect on the word that we are going to use. Phonological similarity to the target word, or the semantic priming with a semantically similar word. So this takes place in our sources of our recognizing of words, and this poses basic source of evidence that how do we recognize words. If these primes reduce response latency, if the duration between the stimulus and the response, response latency is the duration between the stimulus and response, right? If these primes reduce response latency for the target words, we will quickly recognize the next word. One can conclude that words in the mental lexicon are connected to words that are either phonologically or semantically similar. In morphological priming, a word that is morphologically related to the target word that we are to recognize is used as a prime. For instance, calculate will function as a prime for the word calculation, right? Phonological and semantic priming, they are not independent phenomena, they are connected with each other. Naturalistic data, the other source of evidence for the theories of morphology in our mind. This data concerns the actual behavior of language users. Children coining new word or word forms may be interpreted as evidence for the children's having acquired morphological rules. So, as children can recognize different morphologically complex words, so we believe that they have acquired rules to use those words. Similarly, another aspect is speech error. Let's say, take the phrases out of stickers. This is an incorrect, erroneous sentence. Actually, the speaker wanted to use take the steaks out of the freezer. But if you look at this, freezers instead of steaks, but the plural suffix with it is correctly used. The allomorphs used here are correctly. With the is used, and with ka, sa is used, right? The roots freeze and steaks exchange erroneously, but they are correctly, the freezer is correctly pronounced. Exchange of roots bears on the issues of lexical representation of morphological structures. So even in case of an incorrect word, the morphological information was correct. The word freezer as a complex word is stored as such in the mental lexicon. Given its specific conventional meaning, shows its internal morphological structure is still accessible. Complex words can be stored in lexical morphology with their morphological structure still present. So this shows that this erroneous sentence, incorrect sentence by a certain speaker help us understand that the morphological words are stored with their full structure in our mental lexicon. The language behavior of people with a language deficit such as aphasia may throw light on the mental representation of morphology. We have discussed in introduction to linguistic the different what is this aphasia. It's a mental impairment of language. Aphasics that suffered the agrammatism. Grammatism mean they are unable to use grammar. Whatever they speak is not syntactically correct. So aphasic that suffer from agrammatism, usually referred to as Broca aphasics, may not be able to produce correct plural forms of nouns, except for nouns with a high frequency plural form, such as the words I. So they have this problem that they can only use the correct form of the nouns, which is more frequently used. Obviously, eyes, I and eyes. Eyes is a very common word that is used. In this regard, a similar study was made on 3 German aphasic patients with agrammatism. It was found that their syntactic abilities were severely impaired, whereas their ability to use inflectional morphology was still intact, right? So from this it can be said that there are 2 things, that we have different parts in our brain which deal with syntax and morphology. So this fact can be interpreted as evidence for the position that syntactic rules belonging to a different module of the grammar than the rules of inflectional morphology. So those who say that morphology is not a separate discipline can have this as an argument that syntactic rules and morphological rules are differently stored, or are 2 different modules, right? Because this evidence give us a proof that they are stored differently in our mind.